Waters. I'm the lead software architect at Venture Data. This is meant to be an introduction. So if you have already written more than a dozen tests with Selenium Web Driver, you're probably not going to learn a lot here. But if you've looked at it and you're like, wow, which file do I download? Or you got it and you're like, oh, there's all these bindings. What do I download next? Or how do I select an element? You're in the right place. That's the sort of stuff I want to cover. First, let me tell you a little bit more about my background and how I ended up doing this. I remember reading an article a while ago where he talked about a lot of shops that started out, they're not software shops, they're working in a different industry, but early on they realized they need some custom software. So one of the founders or one of the early employees says, you know what, I'll figure it out. They go buy a book and they start programming and they do what they need. As the company gets bigger, they need more programs, they need things to be expanded. So that person says, well, I need an assistant. So they go out and hire someone, junior developer, because they've already got a senior developer. They hire someone straight out of college. That was me in this case. Anyone else been in that situation? Nope, just me. Okay. It's a fairly common scenario. And so I come in, and I've learned all these things that I'm supposed to do in college. But it's a small shop, and we're able to get away with not really doing a lot of them. So about 8 years ago, I got put on this project. We decided it was going to be a web app that we were going to use to track projects and schedule our projects. So I create a form. We can put in the name of the projects, the dates it needs, a few other information. They hit submit. The client can submit directly, or people internally can submit. And then it appears on this kind of spreadsheet where they can click and track as it moves along. So that's great. Now we've got that data in there. We start taking other things that were being done in spreadsheets, adding them in there. We start linking in our employees. We run call centers, and so we have a bunch of part-time employees. We start linking we start putting their time card in there and their time card data and all the information about how much time they spend on the projects, which allows us to run all sorts of reports. We start doing their scheduling that way. So we're scheduling our staff, we're scheduling our projects, we're scheduling, and we're keeping track of that and running reports. We're doing billing. We even start having it. We're like, well, since we put this data in here, it knows some of the configuration options we need for some of our other software. Let's have it set that up. So it's doing all these things now. It's much harder to test manually and think through everything that I have to test. You don't want to be in this situation where the owner of the company has to walk into you and say, that can't happen again. Hopefully, you don't want to make a mistake that big. But when you do, it's definitely time to start testing and making sure everything gets tested before it moves to production. So one of the first steps I had to do was make sure, I know people earlier talked about this, you have to have your full stack. You have to basically have test servers for everything because this communicates to other servers, so I have to go set up a bunch of other test servers and have that infrastructure in place. So it's been a lot of work. I know some people earlier talked about they realized once they started to do testing, they hadn't coded right to do that. I hadn't done that. That's one of the great things about Selenium is that doesn't matter. For your unit testing, you have to do that, and I'm going to have to go back and rewrite a bunch of things to do the unit testing, but I can start my Selenium test right away. So that's where I've started, and that was something I wanted to learn, and that's why I volunteered to do this presentation, was to kind of force me to look at it more and see what more options are out there. So how many people here have written more than a dozen tests? Okay, a few of you. Okay. How many have never written any testing for theirs? Okay. Okay, well, it's good you're here. It's an important thing to learn. One of the things I know some people here have talked about convincing management you have to do it. Make a big enough mistake that you won't have to convince them. But sometimes they think it's easy to just do it manually. And so you have to show them the complexity. That form that initially had maybe a dozen things on it just grows. I was writing the test for it after I did this presentation, or after I had gone through the things for this, and I'm going to have to go through like fill it out a dozen different times to test everything on it at least. So it gets very time consuming. And you also forget there are things that break break easily, and if you write a test for that, next time you break it, you'll catch it sooner. So you might forget to test it. There are things that are interrelated that's hard to keep track of. So that's a great thing about automated testing. So there's some ideas with that. You kind of have some technical debt if you don't have your tests written. So it's great when you first start out a project, just start writing tests, even if they're simple, even if you're not sure they're doing any good. At least you have the structure there, and you'll figure out where you need them as stuff stops working. And yeah, when you go and test manually and you see something doesn't work, great time to write a test. So Selenium Web Driver. If you go to the Selenium website, you'll see there's a bunch of different projects. They have the Selenium IDE, Selenium Web Driver. They used to have something called Selenium Remote Control. Selenium Web Driver is the update of that, so it's sometimes called Selenium 2. The easiest way to use this is you get the Selenium server standalone. That's actually what it's called. I'll run it here in a second. You'll see it. It's a jar file, and you use it running Java. So you'll need to install Java, and I will go ahead and run that right. Okay, so java-jar selenium that's the file name that I downloaded it from the Selenium site. And there's the version number, which is the newest version, .jar. I hit enter, it starts running. This part right here is really important. Someone want to tell everyone what that means? Right. Right, exactly, on everything. That's important. So it's listening for instructions on port 4444, and it will take, I think in the newer versions they're saying they're going to allow you to restrict it to localhost. There's supposedly an option to do it. It didn't work when I tried it. So that means if my firewall's not working correctly, you can connect in and hijack my presentation and start opening my web browser. This program is sitting there listening for someone to give it instructions to open a web browser and start doing things. And so, yeah, you can run those from other computers, which is convenient because maybe you're developing on a Linux box and you want to run it on a Mac and a Windows. You need to run your testing on a Mac and a Windows. You can run the scripts that I'm going to show you how to write on your Linux machine and have it connect to a different server. I'm going to do everything on one computer right here since this is a demonstration. But I have a Linux computer and I have a Windows computer next to me. And my users all use Windows. And so I run the scripts from my Linux computer and have it pop up on the they use Firefox for Windows, and so it pops up on there, and I see that it's working correctly on Firefox for Windows. Okay, any questions about that, getting it started? Yeah? Yes, that's true. And another thing I've seen recommended, you can just put this in a script, and you put an ampersand behind it, and that will background it. But it does pop up things as you're doing things, so if you try to work on that line, you might see random logging information jump up. Okay, so yeah, it's listening on a port. API class is available for most languages. What that means is there's a class, usually in like an object that you can initiate in your language of your choice. Actually, let me go ahead and go to the next slide. The official ones that the project supports are Java, C#, Ruby, Python, and JavaScript. But there are unofficial ones. These are the ones listed on their webpage. There's more than this. Perl, PHP, Haskell, Objective-R, Dart, Tickle. I'm going to go back one because, yeah, the earlier presentation on Selenium, he talked about using Scala, which isn't listed here. So chances are your language is supported. They just don't have, this is just from what they said on their website is supported. So I'm going to show you oops, let's go back. So for these languages on those two slides, and probably whatever you're using, there's an easy way to interact with the Selenium server that someone else has already done all the work for. I'll give you some examples in PHP and Perl, and you'll be able to kind of see how it works and what stuff's the Selenium stuff and what stuff's more language specific. So it also, like I said, it opens a web browser. Which web browsers does it open? Well, built in, it has a built-in HTML unit browser. It supports Firefox. It supports Internet Explorer. But you can also support Chrome, Opera, a bunch of different mobile browsers, and Safari. You just have to download another file. The first three you just have to download that one file. For the other ones, you have to. There's a couple more hoops you have to jump through, but you can test all of those. Okay, so the ones I'm going to show you are Facebook Web Driver. It's a PHP class for interacting with it. I'm also going to show you one that's an extension of Phpunit, and I'll show you the Selenium remote driver, which is Perl. Okay, so the first time, the things you'll have to do every time you use it are you'll have to, of course, include the class for the bindings. You'll have to tell it where the Selenium server is. Where did you run that jar file? What computer? What's the IP address and the port number? You'll have to tell it which browser you want it to run and which website what the first website it's going to go to is. Oops, that was the wrong way. So this is what that looks like in PHP with the Facebook Web Driver. So Facebook Web Drivers, I'm including that class. This one, I'm just including some test settings. You'll see like this URL variable so that I don't have to type it out every time. I was using it was different on different computers that I was testing this stuff on, so that's a convenient thing to do. But right here, I'm creating the WebDriver object, and I am passing it the server. I'm running it on local. I'm running Selenium standalone server on localhost on port 4444, and I want to run the Firefox browser. Any questions? Okay. So what does that look like? So it opens Firefox and it opens that page. So yeah, the URL I have is just garage, which I have overloaded in my host file. Okay, any questions about that? Good, pretty simple. So let's move on to some more complicated things. Just opening a web page isn't very useful. You have to be able to select and interact and check on the elements in the web page. So you can select, Selenium has some built-in ways to do the selection. Name and ID are the easiest. I know some of the other presenters earlier were talking about always setting IDs on their objects because it makes it a lot easier to do the Selenium testing. You can select by class name, tag name. You'll just grab the first one, so that's why usually you have more than one element with each tag name. Although if you're doing more of a synaptic web or an XML, that could be useful. Link text, that's really useful, and even just partial link text. You can do CSS. You can do XPath and JavaScript. XPath is stands for the XML path language, and so you just kind of write in order. Body tag, form tag, input tag, or you can do 2 slashes to search the whole document. So this is saying search for an input tag that has an attribute name with the login. Attribute name login. Okay, and so once you've selected the object, you can interact with it. You can click on it. You can send keys to it. It's like you're typing into it. You can tap, or you can clear the element. Notice I put element post functions. If you're familiar with REST, it uses a REST interface. So post just means we're updating the element. So let's go to some more code. Okay, this is still the Facebook Web Driver. So that stuff, the first 6 lines are all the same from last time. And now here, I'm taking the driver object and I'm calling the find element function, and I am passing it an object of WebDriver by with the name function. So it's going to find an element with the name login, and it's going to store it in the input variable. And then I'm going to call the function send keys on that object. And I'm going to send the key Selenium. And then I'm going to find an object named password called send keys testing password. And then here I use the XPath to find an input with the value login. So that's going to be the text that actually shows on the button. And I'm going to click on it. Any questions about that? So I'll go ahead and run that code. Boom, it logged me into my app. So pretty simple. Okay, so, whoops, got to run that again. I was going to show you some more. So this app is not one from my work. This is something I wrote for my brother, actually. He's the owner of Waters Contracting. And he does maintenance, like yard care and stuff. So he has a bunch of vehicles and equipment, some personal and some work related that he has to keep track of, like oil changes and repairs. And so he wanted something to help him keep track of that stuff. And so I slapped together a small PHP program for him. So that's what that is. You see, you click on the garage, and this has a list of all the vehicles. You select, and you can click here to add another vehicle. Services. So yeah, this one needs to get an oil change every 5,000 miles or every 6 months. Fuel log keeps track of all the times gas was put in it. Maintenance log. Doesn't look like those. Oh, yeah, I think I know why those didn't add correctly. I'll show you that. And yeah, repair log. So a pretty simple app. Okay. Now I'm going to do a little bit more. This starts off the same as the demo 1, but this is. So we log in. Oh yeah, there's another trick I did here. Now before I was saving it in the input variable. I mean, this is just a trick of PHP and most object-oriented languages. Just eliminating that step and I'm only going to call one function, so I'm just saving myself some lines here. I'm going to find the element named login, send keys, Selenium, password, send keys, login, click. And then I'm finding an input with a value of garage. I'm clicking on that. And I'm finding an input with value of add vehicle. And I'm going to click on that. So that's going to pull up my form to add a vehicle. And then these are the names of the inputs in my form. They all have names, so I can just use that rather than having to use the value. Actually, their value on these is going to be blank because it hasn't been filled out yet. It's really only the buttons that are pre-filled. So then I can send keys to each one of these, and it just sends these strings to them. Now this one's a little bit different. There's a select box on the form, and so you often have to do those a little bit more work there. I had to cast it to a WebDriver select element, and then I could select by visible text. And so the visible text in that is auto, that's just the option that the user would see as auto. Any questions about what I did there? About the code? So, boom, way faster than I could have done it. And that's one of the things I think is important. Like I said, if you do it the first time, the first time you write a form, it's not a big deal to test it manually. But every time you have to come back in here and add another feature, make a change, you get sick of filling out that form. And eventually, there's a couple different paths you have to take. So if you just write this test in the first place, you already have it written, and it's easier to do that. Just add that next test when it starts getting more complicated. So that looked nice? That looked useful to anyone? Okay. So any questions now that you've seen it run? Okay. Let's see here. So another part of testing is to verify that things are showing correctly. So so once you select an element, not only can you update it, but you can get information from it. You can get attributes, so you can find out if it's displayed. Can people see this, or is it invisible? Is it currently selected? You can actually search any attribute and get by name. And you can check the CSS properties. You can get the text from it. That's probably the most useful and the most common. That I'm probably displayed and enabled. I don't ever change the name. Okay. Another convenient feature is the ability to select different profiles in the browser, or enable or disable plugins, and actually you can change any settings. Like if you've ever been on Firefox and you've gone to the About settings URL, there's all thousands of items, and you can enable or disable any of those to test out different settings. What does my web page do with this plugin? Because you may want to know if what it does do when Flash isn't enabled on someone's computer. You may have different settings for that. So you are able to test that with Selenium. Okay, and another big issue, and I know they talked about this quite a bit earlier in some of the sessions, implicit timeout, sleep, try, catch. Problem is, the page doesn't always load right away, and Selenium's just running step by step by step, and it might run to the next step before you've had enough time for your web app to catch up, especially when you're running this on a test box. It's a lot slower. So there's a few different ways to do that. I should have switched these two around. Implicit timeout, I'll show you that's the best way to do it. Try and catch is another way to do it, and you may have to do that in certain cases. Sleep is probably the worst way to do it, and you should avoid that. And sleep just tells it to just wait, give it 5 seconds. It makes testing a lot longer. With the other two methods, you can say keep trying until 10 seconds or something like that. With sleep, you have to tell it just wait 5 seconds or wait 10 seconds. And so it really makes the testing process a lot slower, because even if that element shows up, it won't move on until those number of seconds have gone on. So I'll show you some code with the try catch. So this part up here is all the same. Then right here, I click on the save button. And so it has to go and put all that stuff in the database and come back and tell me it's saved. So that can take a while. So well, actually, it's loading up the next page is where it was taking time. So the alert comes back here. So that's another thing. You can check for an alert. Here I can switch to the alert. If the alert's not there, it's going to give me an error. And then I check the text on the alert because I expect it to say saved, that my the information I gave it is valid, and it should save. So if it says saved, dismiss it. If it doesn't say saved, then tell me what the error is and exit the test because my test failed. And then give it 10 seconds to load the net. And then it's supposed to redirect, and so give it 10 seconds to redirect. Well, up to 10 seconds to redirect. And this is the Facebook Web Driver way of doing this. So yours will probably vary. I just got that from their documentation. That's a bit more complicated than some of the others. And then here, I'm able to say, get the page source for the page I'm now looking at, and make sure it has the data that I just saved on it, because it's supposed to show that. I'll show you how that works. We'll go, and if that information is not there, then give an error because my test failed. Boom, boom, boom. So okay, save. Give it a few. Well, it's found it really quickly that time. And so this is after I saved that page. It comes back to this page that has all the vehicles on it, and that's what it checked for. These fields were supposed to be shown. They're shown. So then it exited and said vehicle data found on page. So my test passed. Any questions? Yes.
I noticed on the wait, does that work like system wait as opposed to sleep? So it waits till the process is finished and then goes on?
Yeah, well, it's part of the web driver, and so it's saying wait up till 10 seconds. Because I don't want.
If it happens sooner, it goes.
Right, it moves on. Yep, exactly. So, any other questions? Okay. So what you check in, actually let's go to this. This is the Selenium, or the PHP unit stuff. Sorry, it's all Selenium. Anyone use PHP unit? Okay, just one person. Okay, most languages have something unit for testing. They're all kind of modeled after each other. This is a object-oriented test framework. So it has a lot of stuff already built into it. I thought I'd probably prefer the Facebook stuff, but once I got using this stuff, I actually found I preferred this one. So I'm planning on writing my test using this going forward. So the way it works is you create a class. I'm extending Phpunit, hopefully you're familiar with inheritance. I'm taking the existing class, the Phpunit extensions, Selenium 2 test case, and extending it, and just giving it a name of demo4. It has a function inside it called setup, and these things, you need to set the browser and set the browser URL in the setup. You can also set the host of the server there, but it assumes it's localhost. So here I'm telling it I want to load the Firefox browser, and I'm pulling in this URL and passing it around. You'll see more why I do that more later. That again, I'm just pulling that in from my settings. But one thing I should point out, and this was in the last one too, that DB stuff. I didn't want to put my all my DB login information in here, but it's clearing out the database when I run the test. It's here. I'll go back to the last one to show you where I did that. Right here, I do clean DB because I have all that test data in there, and the names for the vehicles have to be unique, so I can't just keep running the test over and over again. And so that's something to be aware of. Make sure you have a test database set up. You want to have it as close to real data as you can. But notice I also have you're going to have a username and password to log into the database. So those should be, or to log into the app. Those should be part of your test database, not part of your production database, since those username and passwords are available to kind of publicly in your code. Okay, so we set the browser to Firefox and set the URL for what we pulled in. With Phpunit, all your tests are just public functions that start with lowercase test, and then you can put whatever, and it's going to run each one of these as a separate test. Now, on the last one, you notice the web browser stayed open after my test ended. You can tell it to close with the PHP web driver, with the Facebook web driver. With this, there's supposed to be ways to tell it to stay open, but I couldn't get them to work. It just opens and closes the browser each time for each test. And so you'll have to actually log in for each test. So to show you a little bit more about how Phpunit works. So this one, all I do is I open up the URL, my garage URL, and then I check the title. So this is what it should be. This is what it really is. I do this this assert equals. I call the assert equals function pass what it should be, what it really is, and that's a test right there. And it will tell me yes, those are equal like they're supposed to be, or no, you failed your test. Then here I'm testing login. So again, I pull up the URL. Notice again, this one's a little bit easier. The syntax. I reference this object, and then I call the by name function login, and then I just directly call the click function. And then once I've clicked on that element, so there it's a little bit different. Once I click on the element, I don't think it let me send keys directly. Seems like I tried that. And so then I send the keys to the app, and it types in Selenium, then I click on the password box, send testing password, then click on the login. And here again, you see the wait until stuff, but here I have the try and catch. And it's in milliseconds, so I'm telling it to wait 10 milliseconds. There's a better way to do it we'll get to in a bit. And then, I have it checked to make sure that element's there, that it really did load. Because these ones I'm catching and just kind of dropping the error. So I need to try again here to make sure I actually show the error on my screen. So then I call up another test. This is a test adding a vehicle. Notice I have to, so here's that implicit wait. So this just tells it always give it 10 seconds before you throw an error. Whenever you're looking for an element, always give it 10 seconds before throwing an error. And that's the easiest way to do it. that seems to solve all of my problems. So notice I'm logging in again because this is a new test. It closed the browser after the last test where I logged in. I'm going to have to log in again. Oh, I don't know why I still have that. I deleted that out of there. Here, I don't need this anymore because I already have it built in. Oh, well, doesn't matter. So then it clicks on garage, it clicks on add vehicle, it puts all this stuff in, kind of the same as what we saw before. But here I'm inserting a regular expression. It's part of the built-in suite. So with Phpunit, I run it a little bit different. Phpunit. So there, that was the title test. Here's the login test. And here's the add vehicle test. Okay, any questions about that? Yeah.
Is it always common to log in and out after each test, or is there a few typical use case fixtures to stagger session counts?
That's its default way. I think most developers try to, have workarounds like that. And that was something they were talking about a lot in the earlier sessions, is they were trying to just avoid that whole login, because really you only need to test it once, not 20 times. And these tests, the reason people do unit testing is because these tests, like this with Selenium, take a lot longer than unit testing. And so you do want to minimize it, and minimizing login. So that is common to come up with ways to do that. So, okay. Were there any more questions on that? About that section? Okay. Who's familiar with the concept of dry code? A few of you. I mean, dry stands for don't repeat yourself. So you want to do, like in there I had I had the code to log in twice. You want to avoid having code that does the same things as much as possible. You want to simplify your code. You can do things with inheritance with the PHP unit. So things that, like logging in or something, that are done in multiple tests or even multiple files that you're spreading out, you can make it so you have the one base and it's only written once. That's something you want to do. So I have an example of how some of that, I keep coming to this, keep meaning to go to this editor, can work. So this is, again, using the PHP unit stuff. So here I have a private function login. Notice it doesn't begin with tests because it doesn't need to have its own separate test, since I'm going to use login whenever I run any of my other tests. I have a function here called fill form. So that makes filling out forms very quick, where I can just pass it the names of that are in it and the values as an array, and it will go through and do what it needs to do to select them and to send the values to them. Here is a check field. So one thing sorry, should have plugged that in first. So one of the things I was doing earlier, I was running that regular expressions to check that everything showed on that one page, but not everything that I filled in the form was on that one page. And so in this test, I'm being a little bit more thorough, and I thought it would make it through the presentation. I was close in 10 minutes. So for this test, I'm being a little bit more thorough, and I'm actually clicking back on the link, which will pull up the form, and it should pull all the information back into that form. So there we go. I don't think so. so I think it hibernated, so I should be, there we are. Okay, and so I'm going back into that form and I'm checking to make sure all those things are there. I even wrote a function for each. This one actually goes through and fills out more than just the vehicles. It fills out all the different ones I showed you, the services and whatnot. And so I wrote one that will go through. It clicks on the add vehicle, then it calls fill form for the vehicles page. It clicks on save. It checks to make sure the save text is right. Then it runs the regular expressions check. It kind of manipulates the fields array so that it can run the regular expressions check. Then it clicks on the link and it checks that form, and then it hits cancel, and it makes sure that page, this is just to make sure that next page loads, and then it drops out and goes back to run the next add vehicle. So I'll go down to where that is. So I call login, I click on garage, and then I can just call that add vehicle function with an array. And so really, because that's the array changes, everything else is the same every time. And then that allows me to put a bunch of different data in there and check it with different data. So let's go ahead and run that code. Fills in the first one, boom, clicks on the link, checks to make sure everything's there, that it pulled everything back up. Okay, and that's one of the main things you want to test in Selenium is the things that work between the two. You're checking to make sure your JavaScript and your PHP are talking to each other. The main mistakes people make is in their post or get fields. They don't use the same name. Anyone done that before? Do dash and camel case in one, or put an S on the end. That's the sort of mistakes you're most likely to catch here if you're doing your unit testing right. Is making sure that those variables are lining up. Okay. Any questions?
Question?
Yeah.
What's the final output from a Selenium test that you can actually capture for whether it's successful or not?
Well, it depends on how you use it. If you build your own framework or your own one, it's going to be whatever you put. With Phpunit, and that's a great question. With Phpunit, it is these dots right here. Okay, 3 tests, 3 assertions, and it says it's okay. Now see here, it did 3 dots for those tests. Notice here I got an E. I left that in intentionally. This is what they talk about when they say Selenium's brittle. I added some filtering right here, and so not everything shows up under here unless this. Yeah, so you have to select the right thing here in order for what you want to show up here. And that's a new feature, and I haven't updated my tests for that. So some of the things like things that aren't auto aren't showing up in here. So when I go to try to add the lawnmower in the maintenance or in the service, it can't add it because it can't find it in this select thing. And so that's why that E is there. So it's telling me that there's an error. And it'll show, when this gets done, it'll show a much more detailed explanation. It'll say exactly that. It couldn't find something labeled. It couldn't find lawnmower in this element. Or an option labeled lawnmower in this element, and it'll give you the line numbers that it was last called from. Yeah.
Along with that, do you ever add logging to these type of tests to help when you get failures or?
Well, usually, if your developers are good, you'll see it they'll see it on the screen and they'll fix it before they push it to production. And that does become one of the big things is who broke the build. Someone else runs it and says, hey, how'd that error show up? Because it wasn't there before, but then you usually just go back and see who touched that file through your revision control. But yeah, you can have it, redirect to a log file. But usually, you can see how much more, you can see how different that is from last time where it was just 3 dots and it said okay, and now here it's telling me what each of my, well, that's error number 1. It was in this test, unable to locate element in my, this, yeah, on that element name. So I thought it said lawnmower somewhere. But then it tells you the line numbers that it was all called from, so I can go there and see which array I was passing. Oh, good questions. Any more questions? Yeah.
Is there some way to code Selenium test in Python?
Yes, there is. I think Python's one of the, yeah, there is.
Okay.
I was going to say I think it's one of the ones supported by the projects, but yeah. So for every major language, there seems to be a way to do it. You might want to look to see if you can put it in a framework. I found that a lot nicer, you know, if there's Python unit or whatever. And you don't need to, in this case, they've extended and created a new class based off of PHP unit, but you could actually use like the Facebook web drivers inside PHP unit if you just preferred them. I like these better. I think it's a little bit cleaner to call it. One of the things I'm not testing in any of these failures, some of the people presenting earlier said they usually don't test them there in the Selenium. They try to catch it in their unit testing, because in Selenium, like I said, you're trying to just make sure that your APIs line up and your JavaScript calls line up with what's in your backend. But you may want to test some failures. You know, maybe it's logging everyone in. You know, people could be putting in just garbage or blank passwords, and there may be some communication error. Hopefully, if PHP is allowing that, or your backend's allowing that, you're catching that in your unit test. But when testing, you do want to make sure you're handling bad data appropriately. So I have this test that puts in a bunch of bad usernames. It tries blank. It tries with just a username. It tries with just a valid username, a bad username. Did you see that last test? Yep, someone caught it. And again, you should probably do that in your unit testing, but you can do it here, especially if you're like me and you can't do your unit testing yet. Let's see, where did it? Oh, yeah, I'm on the right one. Bad log. Oh, there's my bad logins. Yeah, these right here, that's an SQL injection test to make sure it won't, so the person writing the SQL code didn't mess up. So let's, you can also check if you don't, sometimes you have people submit data and you don't ever show it back to them. So it's just stored in the database. So you may need to check into the database to make sure it actually got saved there. I'm able to check everything back here through here, and then that double checks that it's being sent back correctly by PHP and labeled correctly when it's sent back. But if not everything's displayed back to the user, you're going to want to connect into the database and make sure it was saved in the database. Okay, so then just one last one. This is Perl. Still running tests. I better go kill that. Okay. So you can see I'm including the Selenium Remote Web Driver library. This is my database stuff. And here's where I create the Selenium Remote Driver class. Notice there's the local host. I'm telling it not to close. Oh yeah, it says in the documentation you can do it that way, but it doesn't work, so you have to set it on the next line. There again is the set implicit wait timeout. And then get the URL. And then you see kind of the same thing. They're all built off the Selenium API, so they tend to be very similar. So find element. Here I'm just using XPath on everything. And here you see I'm using the sleeps as well, just to kind of show you an example of how you could do that and say, hey, wait till that shows up. And so I'm going to run that one. And, still uses just that standalone server. It's just, you could send the stuff directly yourself if you wanted to write the the socket code, but it's a lot easier just to use classes that people have already developed in your language. Okay, any questions? Any questions about testing in general, or? All right, well then, that's it. Thank you.